wherever it happens.
Washington.
Sarah.
What Canada?
Windsor.
The circuit.
And
And Bloomberg.
Down. Everything you need to get the edge of the market. Get ahead of trade. Changing.
Region with growth and but not its challenge. Highlights the biggest story in on the issue. Get to ask the Bloomberg. And fence.
In San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
I'm David Weston. Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, and we go on the road, look at what lies behind the headlines today, what will likely be there and tomorrow.
More transparent is
they say every citizen should be investing in the market.
Excel progress in all fields.
Watch Wall Street Week right here on Bloomberg. What you need to know, what you need to think about.
Good morning. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the evening train.
Watch.
This is your treat.
This is Wall Street Week. Balance of power.
This is Bloomberg.
It's the most fascinating time for the global economy in Europe, and the station of center.
We're stress testing consequential ideas, and investors around the world are scoring time, helping translate the policies from Washington actual ideas to Wall Street.
It's the morning actually want to be a part of.
Separating the signal from the noise, with fun along the way.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Listen carefully. Not in the patience trigger inflation, but in the prelude leading to global election, in the distance that moves the decay, and the rising wars conducted by AI in the markets.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily. From the day ahead.
Conversation on your
Bringing you companies and today's complex economy.
The new level premium.
Global business, finance, and tech news as
Floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
Big passion. You are it.
daily, only on Bloomberg. Why do the biggest names in business use Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question. Distinct question. Great. I so appreciate that question.
Bloomberg Television, top experts, great questions. Bloomberg brings you breaking news 24 hours a day. Powered by 3,000 journalists and analysts. 100 bureaus across. Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Of some of the biggest stories here, and in total, get as crazy because weekdays only Bloomberg.
Key investment topic is global innovation. Join me for in-depth with the biggest of stories.
The economy has been doing well. That does not tell you.
We are taking a systematic approach.
This is time defense into your portfolio.
Insight with Haslinda Amin, only on Bloomberg.
World's second largest economy with a growing influence influence in global affairs. Bloomberg the Channel brings you the expertise you need to keep breaking news in the most influential newsmakers in and around China.
More to engage the market more. We're risk on. I think we caught a little sweet spot.
Massive savings right now.
It's already different.
Bloomberg China Show. Weekdays around right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
The Middle East and Africa. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities on horizons, Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insight from this exciting region. Now weekdays, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute news.
Geopolitical news.
Click news.
Up-to-the-minute global news. Whenever, wherever it happens.
In Washington,
Buenos Aires, Argentina,
Central Portugal,
Ottawa.
Tehran,
Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Windsor Castle, England.
The Circuit de la Sart in Lyon. This.
and this is
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading. The close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Africa, a region with potential for growth opportunity, but not without its challenges. Biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa.
new episodes every month on Bloomberg.
Technology is embedded.
all taking away from the beautiful energy that you're describing. You know, there is something that, at least in my head, scares me about describing, because it reminds me of a old lineage. Neighborhoods without resources, artists move in because the rents are affordable, and in because now the neighborhood's a little bit cooler and rents go up, gentrified. What can you do, and what have you done on the South Side to make sure that the work that you're doing and the migration that you're bringing can include your neighborhood, like exile them?
Yeah. Right now, I feel like I'm in the midst of living this playbook that I eventually share with others. But a big part of it was the acquisition of land and then land so that it was always available for mission activity. You know, while life happens, and change happens in cities. We'll have 5 million square feet worth of residential space, 2 million square feet of and cultural space.
2 million
will protect, is over.
Yeah, sir. Yeah. If you're talking on a scale of millions of square feet, I feel so sure that there have to be capitalists listening to this who are going to call you up and trying to say, like, the nonprofit investments you're making, you're a fool. You should be making money from this. Do you get calls like that?
Well, I would go back to this issue of like life thing. I think that one way of reading death is the neighborhood has been underinvested in. Another way of reading death is when the fabric of the neighborhood has been forgotten and been replaced with gross reinvestment and redevelopment. The death of cities is not just the problem of gangs and violence. Cities is also when we become monotonous versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that wealth has to develop more sophisticated tools for measuring health and life, and be willing to invest in ways that are more about what humans need than just about the bottom line.
The life of things with the death of a
yeah.
How have you learned to protect your imagination, life of imagination, and to keep going? Imagination to creativity. How do you and
young, and my dad would make me paint the baseboards of apartments that he was renting. It was time to turn the apartments over because when I moved out, like, whatever you do, don't get paint on my. And so I learned to tape, and I learned to use a paintbrush so that I could mess up his walnut floors. Inventing creativity in me, inventing a deeper imagination by telling me to think the basics. The way that I protect my imagination now, continuing to work. That everything I do, I'm trying to find good solutions for complex problems.
What are you going to do next? I mean, what are your dreams? What is your about what the future holds, and why, what's stopping you from doing it right now?
Well, maybe this goes back to Buddhism. I'm thinking about how to, about 15, 20 years of building, and I feel like right now I'm preoccupied with how to get it all away, how to go of this tight hold that I had on development. It's like a kind of long-term, durational performance. I've been involved in a 15 to 20 year performance of neighborhood. The art gets all. So I'm learning a lot from people who are actively trying to say, I've been given too much, figured out something, made a lot.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Do you have how are you going to start? How are you going to start saying goodbye?
With gifts.
Do you know yet who you want to give your first gifts to?
Artists.
Are there journalists who you'd like to give some of your records to? Kidding.
Maybe I'll keep the records. We can swap records. We can swap records.
Yeah. That was yeah. It's a pleasure for me to listen to you.
It's a pleasure.
I really enjoyed that. Decades ago, the Sisters of American Art had museums, galleries, auctions, schools, and mass media have the distinct impression of a monopoly on imagination itself. Sitting with me at this played a key role. Judy Chicago's painting, photography, needlework, much more, has helped alter the shape of art itself. And therefore, she is doing her first major survey in New York at a new museum brimming with color and generosity and imagination. It's really nice to have her here. Judy Chicago.
Thank you.
the art world has a big business in the way that it wasn't when you were starting. So I'm curious to ask, like, what have you learned about a business and about how big it works and how it looks that you couldn't have foreseen back then?
Asked a lot about, oh, well, aren't you upset that this stock exchange? But, you know, you can stand up to that. You don't have to do it.
Your work is willing to imagine something that, you know, I have a time with, which is not just the death of the world, which is the art death, but your own death. I was really moved by, I think it's called a mortality relief. It's bronze in the exhibit, and it looks almost like a death mask in advance, but you clearly are able to imagine your end. What do you think about when you think about it?
I wanted to be able to fit the end of my life with grace and courage, because it really isn't good to have an aerial relationship to aging. I started out exploring, you know, I start with research, so I started looking at attitudes toward death going back in time, and of course discovered, you know, shroud death, have battles about like a battle, you know.
That, you know, I have a relatively romantic imagination, especially when I'm seeing the wonderful artist work that I, you know, I get tempted to think of imagination. It could take you to very beautiful, but you also when you imagine and grow, maybe people are comfortable.
There are a lot of people who are concerned about what's happening in our world, and they need to be encouraged. Look at it, to think about it. We encourage people to participate in that I created with Deminti, Web3, and Naja, one of the others. And so there are a series of questions that I believe we need, like, if patriarchy were dismantled, would women and men be equal? Would men have to be gentle and vulnerable? Women have permission to be strong. Would the earth be protected? I think there are questions that we need to come together and answer. I mean, we're polarized now. If we don't answer the questions, we're going to drive the world to destruction.
Judy, what you're describing when you talk about this work, the ability that an artist has, skills, and to use her imagination to people and make them think about it. But you know, it's like, Judy, I'm no artist. You know, I don't have these skills. Is there something that non-artists can take from you, where, like you, they can use what they're good at to make other people think in new ways, but to paint and draw the way you can?
We're looking at now is the pushback, the effort to push back all the things that it will take millions of people putting down their phones and going to the streets. I understand why there were not millions of people in the street after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Not protests, because just a protest doesn't work anymore. What is required is the same thing that propelled social change movements of the 70s, which had to do with organization, all the things that aren't fun to do. You know, developing leadership, developing organizations that can take the protest and turn it into actual civil change. I want to say something. To feel like you've made a contribution, to have the satisfaction of that, I don't care what the New York Times for the course of my career.
I live right by the Brooklyn Museum. The dinner party is the heart of this beautiful collection of feminist art. The center for a member of the family behind Purdue Pharma and OxyContin. Apart from just what everyone else says about philanthropy and money and naming, I'm just curious how you feel about that.
First of all, I answer you with a counter question. Elizabeth Sackler's establishment of the Center for Feminist Art has allowed dozens of unknown women and feminist artists to be exhibited. Does she get any points for that? Or does her name disqualify everything she has done? Patronage is complicated. And so is history. It's like when everybody wanted to just knock down the Confederates' statues and sort of erase our past. I'm like, what if we let Black people, African Americans, come and write their stories on the statues so that we would see multiple points of view simultaneously, the point of view of the oppressor, the point of view of the oppressed.
I want to end, Judy, with the future. I'm curious if you know, what art will look like. We're living in this strange time of artificial. I'm wondering if you imagine that AI will demand room for itself in the art world. I'm wondering if the opposite will happen, and the infinite possibilities of computerized art will teach us to embrace craft and imperfection.
My answer is going to be really short. Many, many years ago, Bruce and I had a conversation about, we were in the 30s, about how schools were getting rid of drawing. And we agreed that when you're a young artist full of bravado and energy, you can go a long way in your career. But when you get into your 40s and your ideas get more complex, if you can't draw, you come to a standstill. And I am somebody who believes in the hand. And I believe in the connection between the hand and the heart. And that's my answer.
Well, your hand and your heart and your imagination have changed other people's hearts and their imaginations. I'm really glad you've been here to talk to me about it. Really, really. Judy Chicago.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're very smart.
Imagine this. You've got an imagination, you've got a job, but you're not sure how to bring one to the other. These two guests tonight have used their imagination successfully in completely different ways. One of them has used his to transform his neighborhood inside Chicago. The other one has used hers to transform herself into a Chicago and to transform art history itself. Maybe you use your imagination inside the market. Maybe you use it despite the market. Either way, you can steal the tools of these two artists. Patience, practice, collaboration, voice, and fight. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time.
When all else fails, one must scream. Well, as we look at what's happened to our world, it makes me angry that more people aren't screaming.
There have been times in the workplace when I've said that things were good when they weren't good. Sometimes because I was trying to maintain staff morale. Sometimes I was trying to be optimistic, like this is gonna be good, even though it's not good today. And then there have been other times where I've known that the person I was talking to had such a fragile ego, and you gotta be sensitive when you work with other creatives.
That's enough already, guys. Now, come on. Come on. I know.
This story did come around as something that's a bit different. There is a dark side to it.
It's hard to even talk to people about these chemicals and tell them, look, there's a chemical that's in you that's not found anywhere in nature.
This is the shadow fleet. To act like behaviour makes you think, well, what else is going on?
Or fake image from an authentic one. Deepfakes are undoubtedly risks intelligence. You record which look convincing enough to fool all but the sharpest among us.
Really interesting is that fake images, even the
Ness monster pic. Creepy double exposure photos of a sad-looking Victorian ghost.
right rapidly advancing. Many experts political campaigns using deepfakes happening, but set to become a far bigger problem.
So, on this episode of AI IRL, things like this.
Is how do you have a society agree on basic facts?
can disagree on what to do with actual facts.
And this.
Should be the independent body? It depends. Who gets to be in that independent world?
As we AI
and is about to be a lot worse. Annie Farid, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
So you're a
having me.
professor at the University of California at Berkeley, and you've been specializing in digital forensics for quite a while.
Yeah.
So deepfake detection, for example. Seen today.
Yeah.
What is the state of disinformation pre and post ChatGPT?
So I think to understand fundamentally new. It is being amplified, powered today, but we've had disinformation before there was AI, well, there was internet, well before there was computer. So this is part of the continuum, but I think it's an important part because it is about democratizing access that to few and now are in the hands of the many. And the one thing we know that when you take a powerful tool and you put it in the hands of the many, the threat vector changes. Okay, so where are we today? So the average person cannot generate an image of a person who doesn't exist and create profiles online, create everything from crypto scams to romance scams to all kinds of different material. And that is what to do. You don't have to know no technical a fake person. Okay. You also have the ability to go to a site and get an image of and describe what you want. Joe Biden, fill in the blank. Rate that image. The images are very specific. We have surveys where you can upload 2 minutes of audio of your voice, or my voice, clone voice, and then have you or me say what you want me to say. Clone voices. Solve. We have lots of surveys where we can videos. So you can take video that you're recording on the camera and replace my face with a face. Do that. First of all, viewers are wondering how it's med students because I was too lazy to come over the bay in the morning, but you can do that.
So on the one hand, more people have access to the tool for purposes like
yes. Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's also used from a more perspective to unrest.
Yeah, or conceptual imagery or thought. I think you make a good point, though, is that there's an upside to the social media, is that when this stuff gets out there, there's a lot of eyeballs. The thing you have to understand about social media, the half-life of a social media post is measured in minutes, which means for 2 minutes. And by the time the fact checkers come around, fix the record, vast majority of people moved on. One. Number two is that social media and human beings have made it come in and fact check and say, nope, this is fake. I don't care what you say. Informed worldview is not to my worldview. I will not believe it. And why is that? So why are we living in that world where reality seems to be so hard to grip? Media outlets, the internet, this of government, media, and experts. Yeah, and I'm the expert. And that, what I think is what is really concerning. We've created these filter bubbles, the alternate realities. And here's the question you got to ask yourself, is how do you have a society, how do you have a democracy if you can't agree on basic facts? We can disagree on what to do with facts. I don't think we should be able to, we should disagree on actual facts of what happened, where did it happen.
Some examples like deepfakes that have given you real cause for alarm.
So they're, and they've given me alarm for different reasons. So one, open the,
yeah.
If you see the image, brilliant.
It was full.
Where you?
I mean,
exactly I was working is journalists and who are savvy, who are skeptical things for it. That's right. So that's what we're. It was fine. I don't care about the photo, but I'll for it, and that's when I cross. There's a t here, or the have become good, really slow by critics for it. That was one. But here's the one that really scared me. The fake image of the Pentagon bombed. It wasn't a really good image, by the way. Twitter on a verified Elon Musk. It went with like a news organization, got retweeted, reshared. Market dropped $500 billion to a crap image.
That we can move so quickly on the technology that can create deep fakes, but so to create the technology to who's leading which camp, and is it be that way?
Well, you can make a lot more money from the creation of it.
All the money.
Like, there's...
Defense does. There's not a lot of money in creating defense, right? Think about the people creating malware and spam.
Here's a scary factoid for you. VC invested $180 million in this deep fake detection technology last year, and that was up from only $1 million in 2017. This year, it's at about $50 million. How much is it to take?
Yeah. And by the way, compare that to how many billions are going into the generative side of things from ChatGPT, AI, all these other companies. I think that's right. I would say the 2 orders of magnitude different. You raise a really good point, is that follow the money. Where the VCs are putting money is where they're going to invest their effort. And the VCs are looking at this and saying, we can make money here, I don't think we can make money here. They're wrong by that. I do think that we are quickly entering this age where people are getting frustrated, not having the ability to believe what they see. And I think that is going to start to become privacy became an issue. Right? Pre-Cambridge Analytica, everybody thought, whatever, privacy. And then Cambridge Analytica, oh man, this is bad. And we also, the corporations thought about privacy. I think we're going to see the same thing about trust and integrity and provenance and authentication. But I think that is going to take a little bit.
Just about detecting what is fake, but also when it's actually real.
Right. When anything can be fake, anything you read, hear, or see, well, then you can deny reality. Let me give you an example of this. 2016 rather, then Kennedy gets caught on the Access Hollywood saying some pretty bad women. Right? And what happened is he apologized. He said, I'm sorry, it was not a and tried to excuse the way. Right? Now, fast forward years, fakes, and he says, It's fake. Why'd you apologize in the first place? Doesn't matter. It's easy to deny reality when something can be fake. And arguably, I think your threat here, I'm worried about non-consensual sexual imagery. I'm worried about fraud. I'm worried about disinformation campaigns. I'm worried about black, about the phone calls people are going to get saying,
robocalls.
Yeah, robocalls in your loved one's voices. I'm worried about all, but that is nothing. It is nothing to not be able to hold people responsible for their actions. Police violence, fake. Human rights violations, fake. Politicians saying, doing something illegal, fake. Where are we? Where are we? Anybody can deny anything. And now we all become tribal. We believe what we believe. There's no external information that helps us reason.
So how do we fix that? Because a huge part of that problem, not even to do with AI, it is to do with people and arguably mass media, the internet and everything else. But that doesn't necessarily mean AI.
Good. Yeah. There's sort of three solution bins. So one is technology so that when I got my phone or a camera, record police violations or human rights violations or politicians speaking, it should authenticate where I am, when I was there, and what I recorded.
Okay,
and
so
the
GPS,
hardware itself.
GPS,
date and time, potentially my identity if I want to give up my personal information.
They're already adding that into like the EXIF data in a right? So
correct. Here's the second bin that's related to it. If you're an OpenAI or a Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, or any of the companies that is generating this content from text, audio, or video, you should be doing the same thing, which is watermarking and fingerprinting every single piece of content so that when somebody uploads an image of the Pentagon being bombed to Twitter, they will know instantaneously that this is synthetically generated. That's not to say it should be banned. There's nothing wrong with it. It should be labeled. More things. One is sort of my bread and butter, which is that, as you said, these technologies are not perfect. They will take a while to be deployed. They will get hacked. So now you need passive text. Give me an image. How do we analyze this to determine if it's real or not? And then the fourth one and the final one, and I think we need all of these, we need the government to say there's a carrot if you do this well and there's a stick if you do not do it well. That is the government's role. Think about product safety, cars, pharmaceutical, transportation, food ingest. The government says to be safe. Why can't we treat the internet like this? Why don't we treat information the same way? Why don't I put a nutrition label on every single thing I buy from a store?
Ruman Chowdhury, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you run a nonprofit called Humane Intelligence. You also run a consulting firm called Parity, where you help companies like DeepMind, Meta, even governments on responsible AI practices and how to mitigate algorithmic bias. But I kind of want to take a few years back to when you saw this play out inside. You were director of machine learning ethics, transparency, and accountability at Twitter.
Yes.
So I would love to kind of get into what you learned about the state of misinformation and disinformation while you were there.
I think the biggest thing to understand is that it is a near insurmountable problem. The volume, the number of people inadvertently, purposely sharing misinformation online is such a near impossible task to tackle.
Could you maybe define the differences between misinformation and disinformation for those that don't know?
Right. On one end, you get misinformation, which is almost like misdirection. So it often has a kernel of truth, but maybe it's shifting people to look at one thing and kind of saying, don't look at this other thing. Disinformation would be purely falsified information, something that's deeply untrue. Most of the information online that is false or fake traditionally has had some sort of seed in reality. Is that with generative AI, we can make much more convincing deep fakes, and anybody can make it. So we will see an increase in the kind of that will spread completely falsified information. And the other thing to think about is also the actors online who are sharing it. So of course you can have bots, you can have malicious actors purposely sharing it, but actually a very big part of the information online that is fake is often shared by people who didn't.
No, it's kind of a contrary. We talk about blaming tech and spreading this. Maybe be doing more to educate people into not this.
I think it's certainly going to be a step we will have in generative AI world. I think sufficiently trained to need everything we need, right? You know, the phrase what we are not sufficiently look at images and listen to and have that of critical. If in general that looks real, for example, a bomb, most of us will believe it and we won't question. If we were to oppose at the Pentagon, we are actually skeptical of that because we want. So I think you're correct. I think this level of people need.
And obviously you've worked at one of them, but there are many. They control this.
So there are ways to take something called synth ID, which is a watermarking photo, and there's a way to analyze the photo, no matter how it's cropped, if it's deepfake or not.
If you take a photo, one of the issues, right?
Yeah.
You know, like if you take a photo of a photo, it's a brand new photo. You need to be able to compression and transmission and everything else and degradation from compression.
That's when we think of these high brains, but really low tech. So synth ID works if you photo.
When it comes to and even take content moderation comes online and should be extra nature, just body rather than a company.
And this is the ultimate discussion. And the phrase I've been using for all of this is one to answer. It depends on the group. Are they appropriate for what? Everybody in the world? We've not yet achieved a body that represents everybody able to confidently speak.
I mean, technically, that's what we have elected officials for, though. And to
the U.S., I think we are having a crisis. I do feel like they're not being represented in governments. That is, this content might be political because it will happen, right? People will be elected 2 to 4 that are new people. We really isn't allowed online to be purely political in nature. And that these companies make decisions. They don't actually purely. If we move it into the hands of, we are literally decisions.
Let's lighten the mood a little bit and talk about putting executives in jail, which is guy I love talking about, but it's really important where I'm a bill in the works that among many other things talk about essentially making executives at companies personally liable if their companies help in making what they online harms online. It's all up in there at the time we speak. But I wonder, do you think threatening executives with potentially being locked up, even if it's an extreme case, is helpful?
I don't know. I think it's very, we want as human beings to have a single person to blame. We want there to be a good guy and want there to be a bad guy, frankly, right? Just in general, as human beings, we love to have hero culture, and hero culture means we have villain culture. Frankly, a lot of these people are also larger than life and, you know, comically villainous people. Being said, to an extent, throwing Mark Zuckerberg in jail, going through problems of social media writ large, probably not very much, because Facebook or Meta or Google machine, right? They're massively global companies. The decisions being made by many, many people. It's part of a company culture. Putting one person in prison may be almost theatrically a pleasing thing to do for some folks. I don't think it would actually solve a great problem.
It's like a nuclear deterrent. It's the equivalent of a nuclear deterrent, right? It's there as a potential threat that forces a different general way of behaving, even if the actual, launch button, the prison sentence never actually happens. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting if we think about it maybe game theoretically, right? So I can't help but be a quantitative social scientist sometimes, and I like to think of things in terms of what are people's motives. So the question is a social media company incentivized to spread mis and disinformation? Actually, they're not. They don't want that because it makes them look bad.
Let me push back on that a little bit, because I do think widely held belief, and even with the previous guest, social media company business models are at the core of why information proliferates, because it's more of a value engaging, even if it's not true.
So what I'd say is the cost of identifying misinformation is really expensive. Balancing that with making sure people have an experience they want is a very difficult. So is a leading to problems of radicalization, misinformation? Are social media actively trying to sow misinformation? No, they're not. And that's what I'm getting. Versus, let's say, somebody who's actively trying to do a bad thing. So for your prison example, if the CEOs of these companies were, then I'd say, yeah, you know what, throw them in jail. They're bad people. I think on the other end, it's recognizing that this is an incredibly difficult problem, and what is the level of transparency and access to these models, or understanding the impact of these models that we may need that may be different from what we have today. So I look at the Digital Services Act in the EU, which is really fascinating. So their audit methodology is based on having these companies prove to an independent technical auditor that the models aren't, for example, influencing free and fair elections or violating fundamental rights online.
So I'm curious, your former team, Twitter, also known as X now, moderation at other tech companies jumping into AI, where it's going to be critical.
Yeah, so to start, Twitter and X are two totally different companies. Companies are driven by the culture of people who are there, two totally different places. But I take your point. Well, I think the people who are drawn to this work, whether it's trust and safety, ethical and responsible AI, which is the work my team did, we're drawn to the mission and we're drawn to the meaning of the work. We understand it's going to be hard. We understand that sometimes we can't solve problems, and frankly, we can't save the world. But I think the fundamental good feeling we have about at least trying our best and being part of the solution. So I've found that every single one of them continue work.
What's something that no one's talking about that you think they should be, as far as AI and ethics, your expertise goes?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier, and the thing I worry about, there's such a rush to governance, such a rush to say, let's pass laws, let's regulate companies, let's slap them on the wrist and fine them and throw them in prison. I think we need to take a step back and think about what we are doing with these new laws, create new paradigms of government overreach to private companies in an almost abstract sense. There's government and private companies in countries like the United States to be separate. We may not always be out of that, but let's be clear, the opposite, like the extreme opposite, is a purely state-run economy. We want to say things, for example, the government compel tech companies in the U.S. not to do we really want the government to be able to tell for-profit private companies where they should or shouldn't be selling their goods and products?
I mean, we did see that with the previous administration. You can't buy these companies' products. You can't sell your components to them. That resulted in the company getting a lot of its own stuff. And there's a risk that may be bad in some people's eyes. It's a tangential conversation, disinformation, but it all supports.
It all just ties into the goal of where we're shifting power. Like now, people feel that tech companies have an oversized amount of power. A fair thing to feel. Now, on a Russian saying, well, the government clearly taking that power. Well, what about maybe developing a world of independent auditors and independent actors? That's what profit, human intelligence. We're trying to build the independent community of people who are critiquing technology and actually being drive and shifted towards the term fiduciary to me thing to a lot of us last year. And I carry that lesson forward when I think about companies who want for good.
Facebook and Instagram are about 2 billion users a month, respectively. No world is home to that many people. That's why Twitter, which owns them both, fierce scrutiny and
that was before term generative AI. For years behind the scenes, that has been a vast network of AI researchers, and it's used with up with to show people content and ads it thinks is going to keep people clicking.
That's not always worked for the best. The long list of outside influence, spread of and unrest beyond the shores of its Californian headquarters. That's led people to question whether switching to even bigger, faster, smart artificial intelligence is actually good for the world.
It is, and it's a snow gets if his company gets it wrong.
So on this episode of IRL, we're speaking to Nick Clegg, a 20 veteran and convincing the world's public that his is So Nick Clegg, great to have you here. Thank you so much for... Now, the Brits watching will remember you as the leader of the Democrat Party from your time. At one point, the Deputy Prime Minister, you have been at what now met. Is this changing what you and the company does?
So it's, in one sense, a continuation, because AI, of course, I mean, I as if it's yesterday, but of course it's been talked about since the 1950s, and as far as better, almost every aspect of what you see on social is in one way or another acted by, ranked by, sorted by AI, and has been for many years. We've, as a company, had a in cutting-edge AI, which we open source. We have open sourced, shared over 1,000 AI databases, and decade or so technology that's used in the industry. PyTorch, for instance, AI live, it was devised by Facebook researchers. That all said, I think clearly generative AI, image models, qualitative stuff in a new direction. In terms of the work I do, is of course a lot of time and thought invested into how you can integrate AI in a way responsible, thoughtful, and we do that with researchers, with academics, across the industry, and of course governments are trying to get with this, and they're trying to work out where and in what way they should regulate.
To add there, but how is it time you're very focused on a metaverse, and now to just hear about the side of things? I'm curious, sense of pride. Are they?
You would say they're not possible. In fact, you can't really build a sort of metaverse suite of products, namely the idea of moving from a sort of 2D internet where you're looking at something on a flat screen to actually being immersively in an environment where even if the three of us were physically apart, if we were wearing virtual reality headsets, we'd be able to communicate with each other as avatars now, in the future hopefully as holograms, feeling really we're breathing the same air. Now that technology cannot be built without AI. Well, you certainly can't build content for that. For those experiences without AI.
But it certainly seems like the rollout of some of those headsets just hasn't quite caught on at the speed at which it was initially promised. And now you have generative AI just catching wind really quickly since last year. You have new generative AI tools that the company is releasing. How would you rank kind of those two priorities, though, given the headsets just aren't quite catching on at the same speed?
So I don't think we ever actually claimed that the headsets were suddenly going to sweep the board. That would be wholly unrealistic. You don't build Rome in a day. You certainly don't build a new computing platform in a few months either. We've always accepted this as a long-term investment. And by the way these things catch on tend to go in waves. I mean, I've read about ChatGPT exploding, and then particularly when kids started going left the end of term and went on summer holidays, it subsided in terms of its user base. These things fluctuate. I think, as I said earlier, AI is not new for us, but at the same time, I think I wouldn't look at generative AI as a kind of just as a product. It's not an app. It's not a piece of hardware. It's much more foundational than that. It's like an operating system. It's a completely different. It's the sort of scaffolding, the infrastructure. I'm mixing my metaphors. I hope you know what I mean.
So how are these changing some of Meta's core products then? You talked about the generative AI that's going to form a core part of the business. Can you just sort of talk us through? I know a lot's new at the moment. What is changing there?
So I think if you look at, for instance, at the where content comes from, that is being recommended to you on Instagram, we've been very open about the fact that over the last year or two, we were already leaning into having more recommended unconnected content, in other words, content that was not connected to your family and friends, but that our AI systems have been able to scour the internet and say, you might be interested in this, you might find this amusing, you might find this fun, you might find this educational. I think you'll see an acceleration of AI systems not only recommending content, but now increasingly generating content. So one of the things that we've been working on is how to make sure that people can distinguish between the provenance, the origin of something which is generated by AI rather than generated by human beings. So we will have visible, clear watermarks on the photorealistic imagery that people will be able to use in something called /Imagine, which is our photorealistic tool integrated into Meta AI, which is our sort of Meta sort of ChatGPT equivalent, where you can ask it anything from a restaurant recommendation for this evening to how to plan your next summer holiday.
And this is going to be baked into Messenger, into WhatsApp, into things like that.
Exactly, and I was going to say, and all of that gets then baked into all of the platforms, into the messaging apps as well as the social media apps. And then again, I think this is a new departure, not entirely new. Some companies look at Character.ai, for instance, they've tried this. We will be leaning into the development of AI characters, personae, from Jane Austen to, a Tom Brady style,
Says
sports
a lot about
expert.
your taste right now.
Well, yeah, it's a big range there.
So as more people start to use these tools, which sound really exciting, I imagine that creates a really robust data set to train these models. Do users have the ability, though, to opt out if they don't want to be part of that training set?
Yeah, they do, and they have the ability to, for instance, delete the data which they have when they're interacting with some of these AI characters, these AI personae that I spoke about.
And those personas, sorry, just to interrupt, but are they an alternative to having a friend? Are they like, can you message someone that you wish existed and who doesn't, or is this an
existing?
Well, I think it'll be very interesting. Actually, I think the truth is, let's see how people use them. Often it's the most sort of unexpected use cases that really take off, but you will be able to, you'll be able to bring in these AI persona into a group chat. So you have a mixture of. So if you're a group of friends who are organising a holiday, you'll be able to all together chat with one of these, with the travel agent who is an AI persona, who'll be able to give you recommendations in that chat group.
And for these product development roadmaps, like how early in that process do you personally get brought into those in terms of making sure that what's being considered by engineers, by developers, actually tick the boxes that obviously regulators and governments and people worldwide need ticking before adopted by millions of people? Right at the outset. So I think the kind of way in which we become more and more joined up, the bigger and bigger that the company has become, as you quite rightly say, in order to anticipate some of the legal, regulatory, moral, ethical, cultural issues which these new products might bump up against, the more we can plan for them, and the more. And by the way, you will have seen when we open sourced our large language model, we produce a 75-page research paper, explaining exactly how that AI model was assembled. Yeah. We have provided unprecedented amounts of information about what data is and is not used, making it very clear, for instance, that the data of your communication with family and friends is not included in the training data, as well as what you can do to control your experience and the use of your data. And I think that is all to the good. The more open we can be about how these new technologies operate, the more open we can be about what the risks and the benefits are, what the controls are for users, and also how we need to work with others. We've had thousands of hours of red teaming, stress testing to make them as safe as we possibly can. We can't guarantee that they won't spew something inappropriate or something, unwelcome at any point, but we can keep retraining it. And we try and do that as openly as possible with other folk in the industry. Because if I can just take one specific thing, which I feel really strongly about.
you can't reassure people about a new technology if you can't detect it in the first place. That requires high levels of industry cooperation, which is not yet fully mature, but it's something we're trying to lean into through something like the Partnership for AI, for instance.
The way you're innovating responsibly, it sounds like, has a lot to do with your open source philosophy, which not every AI company out there is adopting. Some are closed source models. And this came up in talks in Washington where leaders were, just a few weeks ago talking about why they adopt a certain stance versus another. Why did Meta decide to go in this direction, especially because critics would say perhaps open source models can actually make it harder to police and then hold that company accountable?
Yeah, we just see it very differently. Firstly, I should stress, one shouldn't get theological about this. There's space for closed models and open models. And by the way, we don't open source some models and tools where we think it would be ill-judged to do so. Just over the summer, there was an AI tool that our researchers came up with, which can take literally a snippet of your voice and then extrapolate it absolutely perfectly. And of course, that would be irresponsible to open source instantly. I totally understand, and I really don't mean this critically, I totally understand why for other companies it is a competitive advantage to keep it as a proprietary property, which you then charge basically people to access. We just literally flip that round. We think that the more people use our generative AI tools, the more they will innovate and we'll be able to incorporate those innovations into our own products. So, we're a company, we're not a charity, we're not doing this just for sort of charitable purposes, though I do think it has a tremendously positive effect on democratizing technology. Just imagine what it must feel like if you are a country in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, or in other parts of the world where you just don't have any of the private or public entities that have either the money, because you need a considerable amount of money, or the very significant GPU computing capacity, or the data to build any of all of these things. So we think in the not even the long run, actually, relatively quickly, shared technology tends to be safer technology.
Just moving things on forwards a little bit here, there's a really interesting bill that's working its way through Parliament here in the UK as we speak. And one of the things, it's called the Online Harms Bill, and one of the things that it deals with, obviously, is, as you know extremely well, is online harms and keeping social media companies responsible online. And there's an interesting line in it that essentially threatens leaders of companies with prison, essentially, or punishment personally for failing at their companies to keep their companies from causing online harms. And I'm just curious to get your sense of whether that is an appropriate threat, do you think? Is it overkill? And do you think holding execs personally liable could be helpful?
So I think this issue of liability, which of course is not new, you see it in the banking industry and pharmaceuticals. Sure. It's not. I really do think the devil is in the details. It clearly would be both unworkable and absurd.
Yeah.
The notion that
that Mark Zuckerberg could go to jail?
Well, not that the United Kingdom is going to lodge an extradition request to the authorities in California because there's one piece of content they don't like which has appeared on, in Instagram in the UK. That would not work. To be fair, that's not actually what the bill, as my understanding, says. It says something quite different, which is if there's systemic and repeated failure to even cooperate with the regulator in question after repeated requests and I think then even a court order, at that point, executives become liable. It seems to me that is not a wholly unreasonable approach to saying in the absolute extreme case that a sort of rogue company refuses to engage with, refuses to cooperate, doesn't make any even best efforts, even after the regulator has gone to court. I think it's somewhat difficult to then suggest that is.
The line I picked out was the individual has failed to take all reasonable steps to prevent that offence being committed. The offence being online harms, all steps.
No, I don't think it is that. I think if you, to be fair to the bill, though I'm not a legislative lawyer, but I think to be fair to the bill, it is much more heavily caveated than that. Having said all of that, I do think all democracies, including the United Kingdom, always need to be very mindful that where they legislate is where other, sometimes less scrupulous jurisdictions might choose to follow. And so one of the things that I sometimes feel is lost in the debate in a place like the House of Commons is that if you overdo it in legislation, then it's very easy for the Iranian authorities or the other less scrupulous authorities to say, well, if they're doing a version of this in legislation in democracy A, then why can't we do it in our country B? And that's one of the things I somewhat worry about sometimes, which is that the debate around controlling content online, which of course I understand the political instinct because it's all about exercising political sovereignty over things that your citizens see, can often almost accidentally aid and abet those people who actually want to censor speech around the world and pressure private companies to do their bidding. And that's why one needs to, I think, tread extremely carefully in taking on powers like the one that you've just cited.